New Bern, North Carolina. A small brick building on the corner of Middle and Pollock Streets, where in 1898 a pharmacist mixed carbonated water with sugar, vanilla, and rare oils to create something that would change his life forever. He called it Pepsi Cola. Caleb Bradham didn't invent the drink to become wealthy. He created it to solve a problem his customers complained about constantly: indigestion after heavy meals. The formula worked. Word spread. Within 5 years, he was bottling the beverage and shipping it across state lines. By 1910, Pepsi Cola had franchises in 24 states. Bradham was no longer just a small-town druggist. He was an industrialist. With that fortune came ambition. Not the ambition to expand endlessly or dominate markets, but something more personal. He wanted to build a home that reflected what he'd achieved. A residence that would stand in New Bern as a proof that a local boy who'd never left North Carolina could create something that mattered. The house would take years to plan. Bradham studied architecture. He traveled to see mansions in other states. He wasn't trying to copy anyone. He wanted something distinctly his own, rooted in the place where he'd built everything from scratch. Construction began in 1918. The location sat on a hill overlooking the Trent River, offering views that stretched for miles. Bradham chose red brick, the same material used in the commercial buildings that lined New Bern's downtown. But the design was pure colonial revival, with white columns, symmetrical windows, and proportions that suggested permanence. The house rose 3 stories, 12 rooms spread across 6,000 square feet. Large windows filled every wall, flooding the interior with natural light. Bradham insisted on quality materials throughout: heart pine floors, imported tile, custom millwork. He wasn't building for show. He was building for generations. The grounds covered several acres. Formal gardens would surround the house. Brick pathways would wind through carefully planned landscapes. Bradham envisioned hosting gatherings here, business dinners, community events. The home would be functional, not just decorative. His wife, Charity, oversaw the interior design. She selected wallpaper and fabrics. She planned the kitchen layout. She made sure the house would work as a home, not just a showpiece. The Bradhams had children. The rooms needed to accommodate family life while maintaining the elegance Caleb wanted to project. By 1920, the house was finished. The Bradham family moved in during the spring. Neighbors came to visit. Business associates toured the property. The home represented everything Caleb had worked toward: financial success, community standing, a legacy that would outlast him. But something else was happening in 1920 that Caleb Bradham hadn't anticipated. Sugar prices were collapsing. During World War I, sugar had become scarce. Prices skyrocketed. Bradham, trying to secure his supply chain, had purchased massive quantities of sugar at inflated wartime prices. He'd borrowed heavily to do it, betting that scarcity would continue and prices would remain high. The war ended. Sugar flooded back into the market. Prices crashed from 28 cents per pound to just 3 cents. Bradham was stuck holding inventory he'd bought at 10 times its current value. The debt he'd taken on to purchase that sugar didn't disappear with the price drop. Pepsi Cola Company was suddenly insolvent. Bradham tried to stabilize the situation. He cut costs. He renegotiated with creditors. He looked for buyers who might inject capital. Nothing worked. The company that had grown to 24 states, that had employed hundreds, that had made Bradham a wealthy man, was drowning in debt it couldn't service. In 1923, just 3 years after moving into his new home, Caleb Bradham filed for bankruptcy. Pepsi Cola Company was sold to Craven Holding Corporation for $30,000, a fraction of what it had been worth at its peak. Bradham lost control of the brand he'd created. He lost the bottling facilities. He lost the distribution network he'd spent decades building. The house on the hill remained. Bankruptcy took his business, but the residence was titled differently, protected in ways that kept it out of the liquidation. Bradham moved back into pharmacy work. He returned to the drugstore counter, dispensing prescriptions and advice to the same community that had watched him rise. There's no record of him expressing bitterness. Friends described him as philosophical about the loss. He'd taken a risk. The risk hadn't worked. He'd returned to the profession that had sustained him before Pepsi existed. But the house carried a different weight now. It wasn't a symbol of triumph anymore. It was a reminder of how quickly circumstances could reverse, how a decision made during wartime, a bet on sugar futures that seemed rational at the moment, could erase everything. The rooms that were designed for entertaining hosted smaller gatherings. The gardens that were meant to showcase success became simply gardens. The home that was built to establish a legacy instead became the place where Caleb Bradham lived out his remaining years as a local pharmacist who'd once owned something larger. He died in 1934. Charity stayed in the house for a time, but eventually sold it. The property changed hands over the following decades. Each new owner inherited a structure built with care and quality materials, but also inherited the story that came with it. By the 1950s, the house had been converted into apartments. The grand rooms were subdivided. The elegant proportions were compromised by walls that created smaller, rentable units. The home that was designed as a unified whole became a collection of separate spaces, each occupied by tenants who likely never knew the full history of where they lived. The conversion made economic sense. Large, single-family homes were expensive to maintain. Dividing the space generated more revenue than one family could provide. But the transformation also erased much of what made the house significant. The flow between rooms disappeared. The architectural integrity was compromised. New Bern grew and changed around the property. The hill that once offered commanding river views became surrounded by other development. The house that had stood prominently was now just another building in an increasingly dense neighborhood. Decades passed. The structure weathered storms and neglect. Maintenance was inconsistent. Some owners cared for the property. Others let it deteriorate. By the late 20th century, the house showed its age. Paint peeled, woodwork rotted. The brick facade that Bradham had chosen for its durability now needed serious repair. Historical societies took note. The house represented an important piece of New Bern's past. Caleb Bradham wasn't just a businessman who'd succeeded and failed. He was the creator of a brand that had become globally recognized, even if he'd lost control of it long before it reached that status. The house was where he'd lived during both triumph and collapse, but recognition doesn't automatically translate to preservation. The building needed money for restoration. It needed owners willing to invest in maintaining historical accuracy rather than maximizing rental income. It needed someone to see value beyond the immediate financial return. That someone would eventually arrive. But first, the house would have to survive a few more decades of uncertainty, sitting on its hill, waiting for the moment when its story would matter enough to save it. The year 1970 arrived with little fanfare for the house on East Front Street. Urban renewal was sweeping through American cities. Historic buildings were disappearing under the banner of progress. Parking lots replaced Victorian mansions. Strip malls consumed downtown neighborhoods that had stood for generations. New Bern faced the same pressures. The house sat in an area that developers eyed with interest. The location offered potential. The river views, even partially obscured now by other construction, still held value. The lot size allowed for multiple uses. Tearing down one old house to build something more profitable made perfect business sense. But a different kind of value was starting to register in American consciousness. The bicentennial approached. Communities across the country were rediscovering their architectural heritage. Buildings that had been dismissed as outdated relics were being reconsidered as links to a past worth preserving. New Bern had already demonstrated commitment to historic preservation. Tryon Palace, the colonial governor's residence, had been reconstructed in the 1950s. The project established the town as a destination for history-minded tourists. Other historic properties were being identified and protected. The Bradham house caught attention for several reasons. The architecture remained largely intact despite the apartment conversion. The exterior showed the quality of the original construction. The interior, though subdivided, retained enough original features to suggest what restoration might achieve. Most importantly, the connection to Pepsi Cola was becoming impossible to ignore. The brand had grown into one of the most recognized names on the planet. Its origin story, the small-town pharmacist who'd mixed a drink in his drugstore, carried exactly the kind of narrative that historical preservation thrived on. In 1982, a group of investors purchased the property with restoration in mind. The apartments were cleared out. Tenants found housing elsewhere. The interior walls that had carved up the grand rooms came down. Contractors began the careful work of returning the house to something resembling its original configuration. The process revealed both good news and complications. The foundation was solid. The brick exterior needed repair but wasn't compromised structurally. The roof required replacement. Windows had to be restored or replicated. Interior woodwork that had been painted over needed stripping and refinishing. The staircase, that central feature Bradham had been so particular about, had survived mostly intact. The craftsmanship that had gone into its construction meant it could be restored rather than replaced. The ballroom on the second floor, though damaged by decades of apartment living, still showed traces of its original grandeur. High ceilings remained. The proportions that had made the space suitable for entertaining could be recovered. But restoration doesn't just mean repairing what exists. It means making decisions about what to restore to. Should the house reflect how it looked when Bradham first moved in? Or how it appeared during his peak success years? Or how it changed after his bankruptcy? Each period had different furnishings, different uses, different meanings. The restorers chose to aim for the early period, the years when Bradham was ascending, when the house represented ambition realized rather than fortune lost. Furnishings became the next challenge. The original contents had long since been dispersed. Bradham's furniture, the pieces he'd selected, the belongings his family had lived with, were scattered or destroyed. Recreating period-appropriate interiors required research, auction purchases, and educated guessing about what would have occupied each room. Photographs helped. A few images existed showing the house during Bradham's occupancy. They weren't comprehensive, but they offered clues. The restorers studied them carefully, looking for details about window treatments, furniture placement, decorative objects. By the mid-1980s, the house had been substantially restored. It wasn't a museum yet. That would require additional steps. But it was no longer a deteriorating apartment building. It was recognizable again as the substantial residence Caleb Bradham had built. The question became what to do with it now. Simply restoring a building doesn't guarantee its future. It needs a purpose, a use that generates enough revenue or support to maintain it. Historic houses are expensive. They require constant attention. Systems need updating to meet modern codes while preserving historic character. Insurance costs more. Heating and cooling buildings designed for a different era consumes resources. Some restored houses become private residences again. Wealthy buyers who appreciate historic architecture purchase them and shoulder the maintenance costs themselves. But that approach doesn't guarantee public access or educational use. The Bradham house had a story worth sharing. Keeping it private would limit its impact. Other historic houses become event venues. Weddings, corporate functions, and private parties generate income that funds preservation. The Bradham house had the space for that. The ballroom could host gatherings. The grounds could accommodate outdoor events. The most ambitious option was full museum status. That meant opening to the public regularly, creating exhibits, hiring staff, developing educational programming. It also meant finding sustainable funding. Museums require endowments or consistent donor support or admission revenue that covers operating costs. In 1991, the house took a significant step toward that goal. The Bradham family descendants and Pepsi Cola enthusiasts came together to establish the Caleb Bradham House as a historic site. The timing connected to broader interest in Pepsi's history. The company was approaching its centennial. Corporate historians were documenting the brand's origins. Media attention focused on the story of how a small-town druggist had created what became a global product. The house became a physical anchor for that narrative. This was where Bradham had lived during the years he was building his business. These rooms had witnessed his success and his failure. The building itself was evidence that his story was real, that the legend of Pepsi's creation had a specific place and time. But challenges persisted. Funding remained inconsistent. The house opened for tours, but visitor numbers fluctuated. New Bern attracted tourists interested in colonial history because of Tryon Palace. Getting those same visitors to also tour an early 20th century home required marketing and coordination. The house needed advocates, people who saw value beyond the immediate financial calculations. It found them among local historians, Bradham descendants, and Pepsi collectors who'd built communities around vintage memorabilia and advertising. These groups understood that the house represented something larger than one man's biography. It was a piece of American commercial history, a reminder that massive brands often start with individual entrepreneurs working in specific places. Throughout the 1990s and into the 2000s, the house maintained its status as a historic property. Restoration continued as funding allowed. The exterior was repainted in colors that matched historic photographs. The grounds were landscaped to reflect period-appropriate plantings. Inside, exhibits were developed showing Bradham's life, the early days of Pepsi, and the house's own history. Visitors could walk through rooms where Bradham had actually lived. They could stand in the space where he'd made decisions about his business. They could see the staircase he'd insisted on, the windows that overlooked the river, the rooms where his family had gathered. The house didn't become a major tourist destination. It wasn't competing with Tryon Palace or other larger attractions, but it carved out a niche. School groups came for educational programs. Pepsi enthusiasts made pilgrimages. local residents brought out-of-town guests to show them a piece of New Bern's commercial heritage. Each visitor represented a small victory against the forces that could have erased the building entirely. By 2010, the house had survived longer as a historic property than it had served as Bradham's residence. That fact itself carried meaning. The building had outlasted the man who built it, outlasted the company he founded in its original form, outlasted the specific economic conditions that had shaped its creation. What remained was architecture and story, physical space and historical narrative, combined into something that continued to matter decades after the original context had disappeared. The house on the hill wasn't frozen in time. It couldn't be. Buildings age, uses change. But it retained enough of its original character and enough of its connection to Bradham's story to serve as a tangible reminder of what had happened there. That was the real achievement of preservation, not creating a perfect replica of the past, but maintaining enough of it that future generations could still access what had been. The relationship between the Bradham house and PepsiCo remained complicated. The corporation that bore his name had grown into something Bradham himself would barely recognize. By the time the house opened to visitors, Pepsi was locked in global competition with Coca-Cola, operating in hundreds of countries, generating billions in revenue. The company's headquarters sat in Purchase, New York, nowhere near North Carolina. The disconnect was obvious. But corporations understand the power of origin stories. Apple preserved Steve Jobs' garage. McDonald's maintained a museum at the site of Ray Kroc's first franchise. These places served a purpose beyond nostalgia. They humanized brands that had become almost abstract in their scale. They provided physical evidence that massive enterprises started with individual decisions made in specific rooms. PepsiCo's support for the Bradham house was selective. The company didn't fund operations directly, but it provided occasional grants for specific projects. When the house needed significant repairs, corporate donations appeared. When exhibits required updating, funding materialized. The relationship worked because both parties needed each other. The house gained financial stability. The company gained a tangible connection to its founder. Visitors arriving at the property in the early 2000s found something that looked almost exactly as it had when Bradham lived there. The exterior paint matched historic colors. The gardens reflected period-appropriate plantings. Inside, the rooms were furnished with pieces from Bradham's era, though not necessarily items he'd owned. Creating a historically accurate interior without original furnishings required careful research. Curators studied photographs, consulted with descendants, examined similar houses from the same period. The kitchen became a focal point. This was where Bradham's housekeeper had worked, where meals were prepared for the family. Exhibits explained how a household of this size functioned in 1900. The appliances available, the labor required, the social dynamics between family members and domestic staff. Understanding the house meant understanding the world that produced it. Upstairs, the bedrooms told different stories. One room focused on Bradham's personal life, his marriage to Charity Credle, their children. Photographs showed family gatherings, holidays, everyday moments. Another room explored his business career beyond Pepsi. Before the soft drink, he'd been a pharmacist. After Pepsi's bankruptcy, he'd returned to that profession. The narrative wasn't just about one product. It was about a life that included success and failure, ambition and disappointment. The third-floor ballroom presented unique challenges. The space was impressive, but difficult to furnish appropriately. It wasn't clear how often Bradham had actually used it for entertaining. The room was large enough for significant gatherings, but evidence of specific events was scarce. Curators decided to focus on the space itself, explaining why a man of Bradham's status would have included such a room in his home, what it said about his aspirations and his understanding of his place in New Bern society. Downstairs, the formal parlor became the primary exhibit space for Pepsi's history. Display cases held vintage bottles, early advertising materials, newspaper clippings documenting the brand's rise. A timeline traced the drink's evolution from Brad's drink to Pepsi Cola to simply Pepsi. Photographs showed the original bottling facility, the early delivery trucks, the expansion into new markets. The most powerful exhibit was the simplest, a reproduction of Bradham's original formula, handwritten on paper that had yellowed with age. The actual formula was long since lost, absorbed into corporate archives and modified countless times. But this reproduction, based on patent applications and contemporary descriptions, gave visitors something concrete. This was what Bradham had created. These ingredients, mixed in these proportions, had launched everything that followed. What the house couldn't show was the gap between Bradham's vision and what Pepsi became. He'd imagined a regional product sold through pharmacies and soda fountains. The corporation that survived his bankruptcy transformed that vision into something global and industrial. The disconnect mattered. Visitors came expecting to see the birthplace of the Pepsi they knew, but what they found was evidence of something smaller, more personal, more fragile. Some visitors were disappointed. They wanted a triumphant story, an unbroken line from Bradham's pharmacy to modern supermarket shelves. The reality was messier. Bradham had succeeded, then failed. Others had taken his formula and built the brand he couldn't sustain. The house didn't hide this complexity. The exhibits acknowledged the bankruptcy, explained the circumstances, traced what happened after Bradham lost control. Local historians appreciated this honesty. The house wasn't propaganda for PepsiCo. It was documentation of one man's specific experience in a specific place and time. That made it more valuable, not less. Too many corporate museums sanitized their histories, removing failure and complication. The Bradham house told a fuller story. By 2015, the property had been operating as a historic site for over 2 decades. That longevity brought its own challenges. Exhibits that seemed fresh in the 1990s now felt dated. Technology had changed visitor expectations. People wanted interactive displays, digital elements, experiences beyond reading plaques and looking at objects behind glass. Funding these updates required constant effort. The house operated on a tight budget. Staff was minimal. Every improvement competed with basic maintenance for limited resources. But gradually, changes happened. A small theater was added for orientation videos. Touchscreens provided additional information about specific artifacts. A gift shop opened, selling Pepsi memorabilia and local history books. The house also became a venue for events beyond tours. School groups came for educational programs about early 20th century life, entrepreneurship, local history. The New Bern Historical Society held meetings in the parlor. Occasionally, the house hosted small receptions and gatherings, continuing its original function as a space for community connection. Bradham's descendants remained involved. Several generations had passed since his death, but family members still lived in the area. They loaned photographs and documents to the house. They attended special events. Their presence reinforced the connection between the building and the actual human who'd built it. This wasn't just a museum about an abstract historical figure. It was a place where living memory still reached back toward the past. The neighborhood around the house changed slowly. Some of the other grand homes on Pollock Street were preserved. Others were subdivided into apartments or converted to offices. The area retained its historic character, but it wasn't frozen. New Bern was a living town, not a theme park. The Bradham house existed within that reality, historic but not isolated from contemporary life. The Trent River, visible from the house's windows, continued flowing as it had for centuries. Bradham had watched boats pass from these same windows. He'd seen the seasons change, the water rise and fall with tides. The view connected present visitors to his experience, offering a shared perspective across time. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and furniture polish. The floors creaked under footsteps. Light fell through original windows, creating patterns that Bradham himself would have recognized. These physical qualities mattered. They made the past tangible in ways that photographs and written accounts couldn't match. The house never attracted massive crowds. It wasn't that kind of destination. But it drew a steady stream of visitors year after year. Some came because they loved Pepsi and wanted to see where it started. Others came because they were interested in New Bern history or early 20th century architecture. A few came because they'd heard about Bradham's story and wanted to see the physical space where it had unfolded. What they found was a building that had survived against considerable odds. The house could have been demolished in the 1970s when it sat abandoned. It could have collapsed from neglect. It could have been gutted and converted beyond recognition. Instead, it remained largely intact, preserved through the combined efforts of people who believed its story mattered. That belief sustained the house through decades of uncertainty. It would need to sustain it through whatever came next. Preservation was never a one-time achievement. It was an ongoing negotiation with time, funding, and changing priorities. By the early 2000s, the Bradham house faced new challenges that earlier preservationists hadn't anticipated. The building's systems were aging again. The electrical work from the 1970s restoration was outdated. Plumbing needed attention. The HVAC system struggled to maintain proper temperature and humidity levels for artifact preservation. Insurance costs climbed steadily. Every year brought higher premiums for a wooden structure filled with irreplaceable objects. The board of directors met quarterly to review finances. The numbers were never comfortable. Admission fees covered only a fraction of operating expenses. Grants required extensive applications with no guarantee of success. Private donations fluctuated unpredictably. The organization survived through careful management and occasional windfalls when a generous donor stepped forward. Staff turnover created institutional knowledge problems. Directors came and went. Volunteers aged out of their roles. Each departure meant losing someone who understood the house's quirks, who knew which floorboards were loose, which windows stuck, which radiators needed bleeding before winter. New people had to learn these details through experience. The house also contended with competition for tourist attention. New Bern marketed itself as a historic destination, but visitors had limited time. Tryon Palace, the reconstructed colonial governor's residence, dominated the town's tourism infrastructure. It had larger budgets, more staff, better marketing. The Bradham house couldn't compete on those terms. It survived by offering something different, a more intimate experience focused on a specific individual and a specific moment in American business history. Some years were easier than others. When Pepsi celebrated anniversaries, corporate interest in the Bradham story increased. The company occasionally sent representatives to events at the house. They donated funds for specific projects, new exhibits, building repairs. These contributions helped significantly, but couldn't be counted on annually. The relationship between the house and PepsiCo remained complicated. The corporation owned the brand and controlled its image globally. The house preserved the memory of an individual who'd created something remarkable, but lost control of it. These weren't opposing narratives exactly, but they didn't align perfectly either. Corporate messaging emphasized success and global reach. The house told a story that included failure, loss, bankruptcy. Both were true. Both mattered. Academic interest in Bradham grew slowly. Business historians researched early soft drink companies. Marketing scholars studied how regional brands achieved national distribution. Economic historians examined how small businesses navigated the volatile economy of the early 20th century. Graduate students occasionally appeared at the house, requesting access to documents and photographs. Their dissertations and journal articles added depth to Bradham's story, moving it beyond simple success or failure binaries. The house benefited from broader trends in historic preservation. The National Trust for Historic Preservation promoted small historic sites as important cultural resources. State preservation offices provided technical assistance. Regional conferences brought together people managing similar properties, allowing them to share solutions to common problems. The Bradham House wasn't isolated. It existed within a network of organizations facing similar challenges. Technology created new preservation challenges. Climate control became increasingly important as understanding of conservation science improved. Artifacts needed stable temperature and humidity to prevent deterioration. But running HVAC systems constantly was expensive. The house had to balance ideal preservation conditions against budget realities. Compromises were necessary. Some rooms maintained tighter environmental controls than others. The most valuable artifacts received priority protection. Digital preservation offered new possibilities. Photographs and documents could be scanned, creating backup copies that would survive even if originals degraded. But digitization required equipment, expertise, and time. Staff worked through the collection gradually, prioritizing the most fragile items. The project would take years to complete. Social media changed how the house connected with potential visitors. A Facebook page allowed staff to share photographs and historical tidbits regularly. Posts about Bradham's life or the house's restoration reached people who would never have learned about the site through traditional marketing. Engagement was modest but genuine. People commented, shared posts, asked questions. The house gained visibility among younger audiences who might eventually visit. Pandemic shutdowns in 2020 forced the house to close temporarily. Revenue disappeared overnight. Staff worried the organization wouldn't survive, but emergency grants for small museums provided crucial support. When reopening became possible, protocols were implemented. Masks, capacity limits, enhanced cleaning. Visitors returned slowly, but they did return. The crisis had been survived. The experience revealed something important about the house's role in the community. During closure, people reached out expressing concern. They asked when tours would resume. They wanted to know the house was okay. These weren't just polite inquiries. People genuinely cared. The building mattered to more individuals than staff had realized. It had become woven into New Bern's identity in ways that went beyond tourism statistics. The house also served as an anchor for Bradham's descendants. His great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren visited periodically. They brought family photographs to share with staff. They told stories passed down through generations, details about Bradham's personality that didn't appear in written records. These contributions enriched the historical narrative, adding texture and humanity to archival documents. One descendant donated Bradham's personal Bible, a small, leather-bound volume he'd carried for decades. The book contained handwritten notes in the margins, passages he'd underlined, dates marking significant family events. It was placed in a display case in the parlor, becoming one of the house's most affecting artifacts. Visitors lingered before it, reading the inscriptions, imagining Bradham's hands turning these same pages. The neighborhood continued evolving. Some nearby properties were restored beautifully, others deteriorated. The house existed in this mixed environment, neither in a perfectly preserved historic district nor in an area that had completely lost its character. This felt appropriate somehow. Bradham had lived in a real neighborhood, not a museum setting. The current context reflected that reality. Maintenance never ended. Painting, roof repairs, gutter cleaning, landscaping. The list was perpetual. Every time one project finished, another became urgent. Staff joked darkly about the tyranny of old houses, but they kept working. The building was worth it. Educational programs expanded gradually. School groups learned about entrepreneurship using Bradham's story as a case study. What decisions had he made correctly? Where had he miscalculated? Students analyzed his business model, debated his choices, imagined alternative strategies. The house became a classroom where history taught practical lessons. Local historians continued researching, uncovering new details about Bradham's life. Newspaper archives revealed advertisements he'd placed. City directories showed when he'd moved between addresses. Court records documented his bankruptcy proceedings. Each discovery added fragments to the larger picture. The story became richer, more complete, more complicated. The house also attracted people interested in architecture and design. The interior woodwork demonstrated craftsmanship that was rare in new construction. Visitors who worked in trades appreciated the joinery, the hardware, the plaster details. They understood the skill required to create these elements. Their appreciation added another dimension to the house's significance. Occasionally, someone who'd worked at the Pepsi bottling plant visited. These were older individuals now, men and women who'd spent careers in the local soft drink industry. They remembered the plant before it closed, the smell of syrup, the sound of bottles clinking on conveyor belts, the camaraderie among workers. Their stories connected Bradham's original enterprise to the industrial operation that had employed generations of New Bern residents. The house preserved not just one man's story, but the economic history of an entire community. The Trent River continued flowing past the house. Boats still moved along its surface. The water reflected changing skies, holding light in patterns that shifted with weather and season. Bradham had watched this same river. He'd seen storms approach across its surface. He'd witnessed sunsets that turned the water gold. The continuity was profound. Inside, volunteers dusted shelves and straightened exhibits. They answered visitors' questions, sometimes admitting they didn't know certain details. The house wasn't presented as having all the answers. It offered what could be known, what had survived, what evidence supported. Uncertainty was acknowledged honestly. The building's survival seemed increasingly remarkable. So many similar structures had vanished. Economic pressures, changing tastes, simple neglect had erased countless homes from this era. That this one particular house remained was partly luck, partly the stubborn dedication of people who refused to let it disappear. But survival alone wasn't the goal. The house needed to matter, to serve some function beyond simply existing. It had to justify the resources required to maintain it. This meant continuing to evolve, to find new ways of engaging visitors, to remain relevant as the world changed around it. The challenge was finding that relevance without compromising authenticity. Theme parks manufactured experiences. Museums sometimes sanitized history into comfortable narratives. The Bradham house occupied different territory. It preserved complexity, acknowledged failure alongside achievement, presented one man's life without demanding he become a symbol of anything larger than himself. Visitors sometimes asked uncomfortable questions. Why did Bradham expand so aggressively during wartime? Did he consider the ethics of profiting from sugar speculation? What about workers who lost jobs when the company collapsed? The house didn't provide tidy answers. History resisted simple moral judgments. Bradham made choices based on information available to him, operating within systems he didn't create. Understanding required context, not condemnation. The neighborhood around the house continued changing. Property values fluctuated. Some homes were meticulously maintained. Others showed neglect. The block never achieved uniform perfection, which actually made it more honest. Real neighborhoods contained variation. The Bradham house existed within that reality, not isolated from it. Technology offered new preservation tools. Digital archives stored photographs and documents that previously required physical space. Three-dimensional scanning captured architectural details with precision impossible decades earlier. But technology couldn't replace the experience of standing in rooms where Bradham had lived. Physical spaces conveyed information that screens couldn't duplicate. The scale of rooms, the quality of light, the feel of floorboards underfoot, these sensory details mattered. Funding remained perpetually uncertain. Grants covered specific projects but not ongoing operations. Admission fees helped but never sufficed. The house depended on donations from people who believed preservation mattered. Each check represented someone's conviction that saving this building served purposes beyond nostalgia. Some donors were wealthy, many were not. Small contributions accumulated into meaningful support. Staff developed expertise in creative problem-solving. When the furnace failed, they researched grants for energy efficiency upgrades. When the roof needed replacing, they documented the project extensively, using it as educational content about historic building maintenance. Every challenge became an opportunity to demonstrate how preservation actually worked, the unglamorous reality behind museum displays. The house also served as a gathering place. Community organizations held meetings in its rooms. Local historians presented research findings. Students conducted oral history interviews with longtime residents. The building became infrastructure for collective memory, a space where people could engage with their community's past in concrete ways. Bradham's story resonated differently across generations. Older visitors remembered when Pepsi was still bottled locally. Middle-aged visitors connected his entrepreneurial journey to their own business experiences. Younger visitors saw parallels to startup culture, the risk and ambition and potential for spectacular failure. The house met people where they were, allowing each generation to find its own meaning in the narrative. Preservation purists sometimes criticized adaptations made to keep the building functional. Modern climate control, updated electrical systems, accessibility modifications for visitors with disabilities. These changes altered the structure from its original state. But houses were never meant to be static. Bradham himself had modified the building during his lifetime. Preservation meant maintaining significance, not freezing every detail in amber. The garden behind the house grew vegetables and herbs. Volunteers planted varieties Bradham might have known, connecting visitors to the agricultural context of his era. Tomatoes, beans, squash, simple crops that required constant attention. The garden demonstrated that preservation extended beyond buildings into landscapes, foodways, the entire ecosystem of daily life. Partnerships with universities brought researchers who studied various aspects of Bradham's business. Marketing professors analyzed his advertising strategies. Economists examined his expansion decisions. Chemists investigated Pepsi's original formula. Each academic discipline found questions worth exploring. The house became a site for scholarly inquiry, generating knowledge that extended far beyond local history. Some visitors arrived expecting a Pepsi shrine. They wanted celebration, brand mythology, the triumphant story of an iconic product. The house offered something more complicated. It presented a man who created something significant, then lost control of it. Success and failure intertwined so completely that separating them became impossible. This nuanced narrative disappointed people seeking simple inspiration, but rewarded those willing to engage with complexity. The river kept flowing. Seasons cycled through their patterns. Spring brought flowering trees. Summer heat made the house's thick walls valuable shelter. Fall painted the neighborhood in rust and gold. Winter stripped trees bare, revealing architectural details obscured by foliage other months. The building endured through all of it. Occasionally, someone proposed grand plans. Turn it into a restaurant. Expand with modern additions. Create an interactive experience center. These ideas always foundered on the same reality. The house's power came from its modesty. It was a home, not a monument. Preserving that domestic scale meant resisting the impulse toward spectacle. Bradham had lived ordinary days here. He'd eaten breakfast, read newspapers, worried about bills. The house contained those mundane realities alongside the dramatic business narrative. Both mattered. The breakfast table where he'd drunk coffee was as historically significant as any contract he'd signed. Daily life shaped decisions that changed industries. The organization managing the house established an endowment. The fund would never grow large enough to eliminate financial concerns, but it provided modest stability. Future generations wouldn't start from zero. Someone, decades from now, would benefit from decisions made today. Preservation required thinking beyond immediate needs. New Bern's relationship with its Pepsi heritage remained complicated. The drink had originated here, but no longer had meaningful local presence. Bottling happened elsewhere. Corporate headquarters sat hundreds of miles away. The house was what remained, a physical anchor to a story that had outgrown its birthplace. Towns across America faced similar situations. Industries departed, companies relocated. What remained were buildings, if you fought to save them. The house would never be finished. Preservation was an ongoing process, not a destination. Each generation of caretakers would face different challenges. Climate change would bring new threats. Economic shifts would create different financial pressures. Technology would offer tools currently unimaginable. But the fundamental task remained constant. Keep the building standing. Keep the story accessible. Keep the connection between past and present alive. Bradham died without knowing what his creation would become. He couldn't have imagined Pepsi as a global brand. He experienced only the arc from invention through catastrophic loss. The house held that entire story, not just the triumphant beginning. This honesty made it valuable. History wasn't only about winners. Understanding failure taught lessons success couldn't. The front door still opened. Visitors still climbed the steps. The house still stood on its corner lot, remarkable primarily for having survived. In a world that demolished constantly, that rebuilt ceaselessly, that valued new over old, this one building remained. Not because it was the grandest or most beautiful, because enough people believed it mattered. Bradham built a house. Others preserved it. Between those two actions lay more than a century of choices, each person deciding this place deserved to continue. That accumulated commitment was itself a kind of monument, invisible but more durable than any structure. The building would stand as long as people believed it should. The moment that belief ended, the house would vanish. For now, it endures. The river flows past. The rooms wait for visitors. The story remains available to anyone willing to listen. One pharmacist mixed a drink in a small town. That simple act rippled outward in ways he never controlled. The house bears witness. It asks nothing more than continued attention. That seems like a reasonable request. The question of what happens next has no clear answer. The house exists in perpetual negotiation between its significance and the practical challenges of maintaining any aging structure. Funding will always be uncertain. Systems will continue failing at inconvenient times. Staff will change. Priorities will shift with new leadership. But the fundamental reality persists. New Bern has one building directly connected to the creation of Pepsi Cola. That connection won't disappear. As long as the brand exists, people will be curious about where it started. The house provides that physical anchor, the specific place where Caleb Bradham lived while building something that outlasted him. What's remarkable isn't that the house survived. It's that survival required constant effort from people who gained nothing personally from the work. Volunteers who spent weekends leading tours. Board members who attended endless meetings about budgets and repairs. Donors who wrote checks to preserve a building they'd never live in. All of them chose to care about something that didn't directly benefit them. That collective effort represents something larger than architectural preservation. It's an argument about what communities owe to their past. Not worship or idealization, just honest acknowledgement that what came before shaped what exists now. The house makes that argument silently by continuing to exist. Bradham's story defies easy categorization. He wasn't a pure success. He wasn't a complete failure. He created something significant, lost control of it, and spent his remaining years working in relative obscurity. The trajectory doesn't fit motivational narratives about persistence or redemption. It's messier than that, more human. The house reflects that messiness. It's not a shrine or a monument. It's a residence that became a museum because people decided the story it contained mattered enough to preserve. Some visitors leave disappointed. They wanted inspiration or celebration. They got complexity instead. Others leave thinking. That seems like a worthwhile outcome. The neighborhood continues changing around the property. Houses are bought and sold. Trees grow and are removed. The river erodes its banks at microscopic rates that accumulate over decades. Nothing stays static. The house itself won't remain unchanged. Future caretakers will make different choices than current ones. Exhibits will be updated. Interpretations will evolve as historians uncover new information or ask different questions. What won't change is the basic fact of the building's existence. This is where Caleb Bradham lived. These are the rooms he walked through. This is the view he saw from his windows. Physical spaces connect us to the past in ways that words and photographs cannot. Standing in Bradham's house creates a form of time travel, imperfect but real. The preservation community understands this instinctively. Historians know that documents and artifacts matter, but buildings carry something different. They contain the spaces where people made decisions, where they celebrated and grieved, where they lived ordinary days that occasionally intersected with extraordinary events. Losing those spaces means losing access to dimensions of history that can't be recovered any other way. The Bradham House won't become a major tourist destination. It will never compete with larger attractions for visitor numbers or media attention. Its value lies elsewhere, in its specificity and its refusal to simplify a complicated story. It preserves what actually happened rather than what would make a better narrative. Bradham mixed carbonated water with flavoring in his pharmacy and created something people wanted to drink. He built a business that grew beyond his ability to control it. He made financial decisions that destroyed that business. He lost everything except his family and his home. He returned to pharmacy work and lived out his years as a respected but no longer wealthy member of his community. All of those facts are true simultaneously. None cancels out the others. The house stands as evidence that history resists simple lessons. Success doesn't prove virtue. Failure doesn't prove incompetence. Bradham was smart enough to create Pepsi, and reckless enough to gamble everything on sugar futures. Both assessments are accurate. Understanding requires holding contradictions without resolving them. Future generations will decide what to do with the building. They might preserve it exactly as it is now. They might adapt it for new uses while maintaining its historic character. They might let it deteriorate and eventually disappear. All three outcomes remain possible. The house's survival depends on choices that haven't been made yet by people who haven't been born yet. What current caretakers can do is maintain the building well enough that future generations inherit a real choice. If the structure collapses from neglect, that decision gets made by default. Keeping it standing keeps options open. That's not a grand mission, but it's an honest one. The river will keep flowing whether the house stands or falls. New Bern will continue existing. Pepsi will remain a global brand. None of those facts depend on this one building. But something would be lost if it disappeared. A particular kind of knowledge embedded in physical space, accessible only through direct experience. The knowledge of scale and proportion, of how light falls through specific windows, of what it felt like to stand where Bradham stood. That knowledge might seem trivial compared to economic data or marketing strategies, but it's not. Physical spaces shape how we understand the past. They make history tangible rather than abstract. The house does that work simply by continuing to exist, by being available to anyone curious enough to visit. Bradham couldn't have imagined people touring his home a century after his death. He built it as a residence, not a monument. That it became something else reflects decisions made by others long after he was gone. Those decisions weren't inevitable. The house could have been demolished in 1970 or 1980 or any decade since. That it wasn't represents thousands of small choices by hundreds of people who thought preservation mattered. Whether they were right is a question each generation has to answer for itself. The house can't prove its own value. It can only continue existing, waiting for people to decide if it's worth maintaining. So far, enough people have said yes. That's the only reason the building still stands.